Hello friends, Clage back with another video today, and it has now been 2 weeks since Guilty Gear Strive Season 3 dropped, with all the massive system changes, Johnny coming out, and the complete rebalance of the cast. So, now that 2 weeks have passed by and I've had a time to sit and play quite a few matches on my own, knock some of this rust off, watch quite a few matches of the various characters, a lot of high-level players, see what they're doing with these new system mechanics, see what Anji players are doing with these new system mechanics and the new tool. And I've got an okay feel, I think, for how Anji is doing in Season 3 so far. So I want to give my updated thoughts 2 weeks later on how I think he's doing, his relative character strength, and all that good stuff. So let me preface this first. I'm still coming off 2 years of rust in this game, so please take my opinions with a grain of salt. This is not being chiseled in stone. This is not a royal declaration or anything like that. This is just my honest personal analysis of what I've experienced personally and what I've seen from the stronger Anjis and the other characters that I've watched in Season 3 to this point. So this isn't attempting to be a tier placement. This isn't attempting to do anything like that. I'm just giving you my honest assessment of how I think Anji sits right now in Season 3, now that we've had a couple weeks to kind of digest these new changes and everything going on. So with that said, let's just start with the synopsis, the TLDR, for those of you that just want to hear the quick bit and get out and save yourself some time, which I get. I talk too much. I get it. So the TLDR, I think Anji's good. I think he can solidly scrap with the vast majority of the cast. I don't think he dumpsters any character in this game. I don't think there's any character main who sees Anji across the way on the startup screen and is immediately petrified that they are in trouble. But I also think that outside of a couple really scary looking matchups, I think he can stay in basically any fight whatsoever. There's some outliers that I think look scary and are probably going to take a lot of labbing to see if they can be made a little bit closer. Asuka comes to mind as a major one. But I don't think he's sitting around with a bunch of 3-7s anymore. I don't even think he probably has that many, like, worse than 4-6s, if he has any in existence. On the other side, I don't think there's anything better for him than a 6-4, and if I had to take a stab with the information we have so far, I would say a lot of his matches are going to hover around even, or slight advantage or slight disadvantage. I don't think there's a lot of matchups where Anji's just going to be wildly ahead or wildly behind. There are a couple outliers here and there. So let's talk about all of this and how I'm coming to this conclusion. So let's just start with his changes, right? Let's start with the changes Anji got and how they're feeling 2 weeks into this. So let's start with the big nerf. The nerf counter hits and damage, right? So if we go on, put our counter hits back on, force that. Fuujin no longer gives the big counter hit, right? Nagihan no longer gives a combo on counter hit. Rin no longer combos on counter hit. All of these things now require meter if you want a combo off of them. The damage is also scaled much higher. We also have the aspect of Ko doing less damage than before. It does maintain its counter hit status, but it does do notably less damage than it did. So it's easy to miss the confirms we used to get off Nagiha and Rin meterless on a counter hit. Those were nice. Big Fuujin counter hits were some of the most bombastic starters Anji had at one point, and that was quite useful. But the thing to remember is moves like Fuujin, any kind of special move that is horizontal moving or aids in movement or covers a lot of space or is very easy to tag the opponent with in myriad situations, those all got toned down across the board. Lots and lots of characters do not have big bombo counter hits on these moves anymore. And that comes along with the fact that, in general, damage is lower on average in this game than it was prior to Season 3. The damage is notably lower. And while Anji lost some really nice counter hit convertibility without meter and definitely lost some damage, so did basically everyone else. And you can make the argument that these changes are actually a slight net gain for Anji because of his super tanky guts. His guts is now worth more than ever because of the overall net damage loss in Strive Season 3. And it honestly makes it so he might actually get to make an extra mistake per round and have a chance to come back. So, obviously, a nerf is a nerf. This is not as good as it used to be. Rena's not as good as it used to be. All of the Fuujin stuff is not as good as it used to be, clearly. But I honestly don't feel like it is doing something that leaves the character feeling woefully behind everyone else. He just feels normalized along with the rest of the cast, and the rest of his game remains basically entirely intact. And I think that's really important to consider when you look at the loss of those counter hits and the damage toned down on scaling and on Ko and such. Same thing for the overdrives, right? Like, these definitely do less damage. But overdrives got an indirect buff in the aspect that now you have options for hard knockdown that aren't overdrives at the wall with Wild Assault. So you don't necessarily have to commit meter to overdrives all the time anymore, especially at wall break. We'll get into that more later. But all in all, the lower damage, the lower scaling, the loss of the big counter hits, it's a nerf. I don't personally think it's been that impactful. I don't think it is negatively impacting Anji that much in this patch. So, next change, the fan needle steering. This has been a nice quality of life. It's not world-defining. It certainly hasn't become the crux of his game plan. It's definitely not made it any easier to condition people to sit long enough so you can try and fit one of these in during pressure. But now if you want to try and sneak one in neutral, you have a lot more leeway to do that. You have a better chance of baiting people trying to reversal it. You know, they have to actually jump up and chase you now if you do the fadeaway. So it's been a nice quality of life. I think it's good. It's not a massive change, and it's not a massive buff that suddenly changes his whole game plan up, but it doesn't hurt. It's a nice new tool to have, and it's something people should continue to try and put into the game plan, because it's a useful new tool, without question. So, last, probably the biggest question that I'm sure you all have is, do I still think Midare is all I talked it up to be when we got the patch release and I demoed Midare and all the stuff? Do I still think it is as massive buff to his kit as I did 2 weeks ago? The short answer is yes. The long answer is yes, but in more ways than just we get knocked down on most Autoguard now, or a big punish with the Kara cancel. So let's go into why Midare has become everything it was talked up to be. I really think this move has done exactly what we wanted in a myriad ways. So, let me start with this. I have a long-standing opinion when it comes to character strength in Guilty Gear, that if you want to be considered a truly strong character, you have to do something that circumvents the traditional rules of gameplay within a match. If you aren't doing something that is blatantly unfair, or super oppressive, or something that can literally dictate the vast majority of play in a match, you're probably not threatening to be like a top flight character amongst the rest of the cast, right? This, prior to Season 3, this is not what I would call circumventing the rules of Guilty Gear. Not doing something so oppressive that it can actually take control of the match and drastically alter the way people played, right? Prior to Season 3, people would be cognizant of spin. They would deal with the charges on Fuujin and Ko, but it was minor concessions to just not be annoyed by it. Sometimes they'd have to spin meter if they actually got caught swinging a slash into it. They'd have to be a little bit more mindful of when they decide to charge in and maybe do a throw instead of blatantly poking, stuff like that. But the risk reward on doing this to try and alter your opponent's game plan was just not there. It was not there in Anji's favor. This wasn't reward enough to have 10 frames of startup all in counter hit state and a bunch of recovery all in counter hit state for the hope that maybe you got to throw your opponent and start butterfly oki. And then on the very, very, very rare occasion when someone did a dumb and swung a high recovery normal into your auto guard, you got to do a real punish. Now, that has drastically changed. Midare is the first time I think that Anji actually has something that's match altering enough that it's consistently putting a myriad situations in his favor. Autoguard is now a real threat. Opponents can no longer just ignore this or hand wave it as a nuisance that they'll deal with while running their standard game plan. Now, anytime at all that Anji has 10 frames of wiggle room to get into the Autoguard state, he creates a mind game with the opponent. A mind game that has risk-reward consistently stacked in his favor now. It is consistently a good risk-reward trade-off to attempt to Autoguard what your opponent is doing. Midare has counterplay, obviously. We've shown the backdash PRC situation. More and more players are starting to do that. For if you autopilot Midare, there's a lot of people, if you go up and you just do this every single time, they're going to PRC, drift on reaction, and whiff punish you. But here's the thing. That is now something the opponent has to allot for at all times. They have to be cognizant that they get auto-guarded on anything, even if it's just a stand jab. They have to be ready to do something about Midare, because it's real. It is a true threat. At the very worst, it is a free knockdown into Butterfly Oki on the entire cast. That's just, if they're close enough to get a melee attack guarded and Midare'd, you almost certainly get Butterfly Oki. And if you hit really far away, you catch them in the air and it knocks them back, you're still going to get run-up meaty strike throw options, right? So they can't just ignore this. This is not something you can just go, oh, okay, I'm not that worried about it. Especially not for the really good Anjis who are starting to utilize this stuff. The Kara cancel, right? Now you're turning an auto-guarded jab into 200 plus damage, and a wall break, and positive bonus, and you spend a whopping 50 meter to get it done. That's it. That's all it costs. That risk-reward, that's his. That is heavily weighted in Anji's favor. This went from something that was pretty high risk for pretty mediocre reward to now it is still high risk. Spin is always going to be high risk if you get hit out of the startup or you get hit out of the recovery. Getting counter hit is not good in Guilty Gear Strive. It hurts. There are still a lot of characters with big bombo starters if they counter hit you. But because the threat of Midare is so real, now you have a lot of opponents who have to sit, they have to give the concession, they have to try and wait you out, and they have to try to poke the recovery. And the other thing is that this isn't just spin. This Midare isn't just attached to just the spin. It's attached to charge Fuujin. It's attached to charge Ko. If they just want to sit and wait you out and pray they're either going to be able to poke the recovery on reaction or dash up and throw you, that's still risk-reward going way in Anji's favor. Because if they wait you out and then they block Fuujin, well, they block Fuujin. We all know Fuujin follow-ups aren't amazing. It's not real mix-up. But still, they blocked a move with a lot of block stun on it that has follow-ups. They have to play to that. They have to deal with it. That puts a lot of mental strain on the opponent. They now have to be considering this constantly because getting knocked down doesn't feel good. Getting Kara canceled for half your bar feels miserable. So I really think this is the first time ever where the risk-reward is so heavily in Anji's favor and he can so consistently put a guessing game in the opponent where they have to decide, what do I want to do? Do I want to wait this out? Do I want to dare him to prove he can Midare every time? You know, there's a lot of situations where Midare is not a cure-all, right? If you auto-guard, let's do like, here, let's do a perfect example, actually. This will work well. So if we do this, right? We do Misfinder. And I auto-guard this at like max range. Nothing getting there with Midare. Midare is not solving that problem. The Kara cancel also isn't solving that problem. You're not drifting 4 character lengths across the screen. You might be able to get like a stand kick or something there. But if you auto-guard a massively long-range move, or you auto-guard a projectile, you auto-guard something that does not leave the opponent right next to you ready to be knocked down by Midare or be punished by the Kara cancel, it doesn't solve all the problems. It's not just Midare itself that's the threat. It's the fact that Midare exists and now the risk-reward on this thing is no longer garbage. It's in Anji's favor. And when you have something you can consistently throw out in neutral or even in pressure that puts risk-reward in your favor, your opponent has to take concessions for that. They have to deal with this. They can't just look at that and go, yeah, the spin's annoying, but I'll counter hit him and then he dies. It's fine. I'm not going to worry about that. I'll worry about Kacho Fugets. That's one frame startup. That thing is really annoying. Well, it still is. But now we have Kacho Fugets on top of a true, actual tool in Midare to work with. Midare does have counterplay. Like, we talked about PRC backdash. We talked about auto-guarding long-range things. Auto-guarding in the air and people air dashing away. Like, there's counterplay to it. It's not counterplay that a lot of people want to use because it's often going to cost them meter to even perform it. But it's a well-balanced tool. It is a tool that is well-designed. And I have not often said that about things with Anji's kit, especially related to auto-guard. I think this is actually really well-designed. It fixes a giant hole in the risk-reward of auto-guard. It makes auto-guard more threatening, but it is not a universal answer for doing auto-guard and winning matches. It'll get you started. It'll get people to change what they're doing, change their poke habits, maybe force them to have to just blatantly dash at you and look for a throw. But that's a lot. That's a big deal. That's really, really, really huge for Anji. If you auto-guard predictably, we'll get hammered for it. If you just try to base your entire game plan around this and go, it's fine, I'm going to Midari or Kara cancel you eventually, and then that's how I'm going to win the game, that's not going to work. It does not do everything by itself. It's that with the rest of his kit, the rest of the things he has, which, in fairness, the rest of Anji's kit is okay. I don't think anyone is going to look at Anji's kit and go, yeah, all this stuff is really strong in the scope of Guilty Gear Strive, right? Like, I'll talk some more about his buttons when we get to the weaknesses side of Anji in terms of Season 3. But in general, this being such a big thing that forces mind games, forces reactions, forces the opponent to allocate a lot of their game plan to making sure they work around this, that opens up new avenues for Anji to challenge them, to put risk reward in his favor, and to play a more well-rounded, well-consistent performing game. So I think Midare was one of the best things he ever could have gotten. This is a massive buff. It is a massive buff to AutoGuard because it makes everything about this move better. It's not just that Midare itself is good. It is. It's great. It's really, really good to have an answer now for auto-guarding low-level moves and getting something out of it. Something real, not just a throw. But it's the whole package. It's what it does for the entirety of Anji's kit circling around the auto-guard mechanic that makes it so good. So, 2 weeks later, do I still think Midare is the juice? Yes. I absolutely do. It is the most important thing he got this season. It is what is making him be more threatening in a lot of matchups. It is what is bringing a lot of matchups that were kind of lopsided into manageable, and matchups that were maybe slightly disadvantaged or that 4-6 into an even range. And if you're playing even with most of the cast, that's not a terrible place to be. It may not put you in the upper echelon of the best characters, but it means you can fight, and that's really big in this game. So, beyond Anji's personal changes then, let's talk about the actual system mechanics changes, right? I mentioned the damage scaling. The overall damage toned down, damage in general is just lower than it was. It's not as easy to finish off kills this season as it was prior to Season 3 unless you get your juicy starters, your close-ass starters, your stand-heavy starters, your counter-hit sweep starters. Damage is, on average, very, very much lower than it was prior to Season 3. That's just a real thing. The thing that this works out in favor for Anji is, one, I mentioned it, he has the highest level guts in the game. That makes him extra tanky with the last, 30% of his health bar once the guts really starts kicking in. That lower damage means more often than not, Anji gets an extra chance in a round. He gets to try and make a comeback with a very small pixel amount of life, because things that used to be guaranteed kills a lot of times can't make it anymore. They cannot get there due to the heavier scaling, the smaller options for big counter hits. That's good. Extra chances are good. That's a big deal. And the other thing is that despite damage being noticeably lower for everyone, Anji included, Anji still boasts what I would consider to be very good average damage. I think Anji, on the whole, for his general resource to damage output, is above average. I think he's quite good at that. Anji's never really had a problem in this game of, if I actually hit you, it's gonna hurt. There is rarely a time where Anji doesn't hit you with a good starter and has a good shot at cashing out half your health bar without investing meter a lot of the time. So the damage tone down, I think, is an indirect buff to Anji because he is still doing very good damage, especially relative to the cast for his resource investments, and he probably gets an extra chance in a lot of rounds due to the sheer amount of guts and tankiness he has. The other thing, Wild Assault. This thing's great for Anji. It's great for everyone. I've talked about it in videos a lot already. Wild Assault is strong. This is a powerful mechanic, right? Allow me a drink here real quick. But I think this is especially strong for Anji because one of the biggest holes in Anji's game plan is chasing down your opponent to actually run your offensive game, right? We have the poor proximity on close S. We all know about the issue with the dash and how difficult it is to get in close S range, how difficult it is to enforce this frame trap into anything. It's only +1. FD pushes it out a good ways. Anji does not have the most amazing strike throw game without resorting to doing things like threatening Autoguard or without doing real big delays into Fuujin. Like, his strike throw, just as it is, just doing a strike throw is pretty hard to enforce. It's legitimately difficult to enforce, right? You know, the inevitability of Fuujin being a situation many people know how to wait out and react to used to mean that, you know, our pressure looked a lot like this for a long time. You know, we take a couple normals and Fuujin our way in and hope we could continue the fight from there. Sometimes we would try and steal a turn by going in with spin. Sometimes you try to do the frame trap, you know. But there's not a lot of variety there. That just getting to the opponent can be a challenge for Anji. He is not the most mobile character. Of course, Autoguard, as much as it has been buffed, is not necessarily an answer for opponents that have strong keep-out games. So having a way now to where if we can just get them to block anything, we can keep the pressure up, that's big for this character. If you can spend 50% burst to completely circumvent another run of trying to chase them down so you can run offense again, that's a great trade-off. That's incredibly good. And the other thing, probably the more important one in my opinion, is that now Anji has a very, very reliable way to wall break without resorting to Iseogi for a hard knockdown. That honestly might be the strongest aspect of Wild Assault for Anji. Because Anji, like a lot of characters, is obviously notably better when he can use tension to convert, right? You hit a straight Nagya, you Roman cancel it, and you get your big cash out from there, right? One of those situations that always felt kind of bad for Anji is you spend some meter to get your cash out, you know, and Roman cancel, do whatever it takes to get stuff going. You take them to the wall, and you get the wall stick, and now you either don't even have meter for Iseogi, or even if you do, it's going to tack on paltry damage, but you have to do it because going back to round start range without a hard knockdown for Anji is not favorable. That doesn't feel good. There is almost no matchup where we want to go back to this distance and let them get up immediately with a soft knockdown after a wall break. That doesn't feel good. If we get the hard knockdown at the wall break and don't have to spend meter for it, that means we get this safe jump, go in, and we have all the ways in the world to start pressure, extend pressure, and confirm, and do mix with stuff like PRC Rin. Saving that meter for mix and offense and pressure and conversions is a massive boon to this character. It's really, really good to have this break the wall and give a hard knockdown. That is just huge for Anji. It's great for a lot of characters. There are a lot of characters eating real good by driving you to the wall, not spending their meter, getting the positive bonus, and knocking you down with Wild Assault. It is a very prevalent strategy because it's strong, and it's going to remain strong. So, but giving us a chance where we might not have to chase down the opponent one extra time in a round, that's a big deal for this character. That's a very, very big deal for this character, and that's a welcome change. I don't know that it is so much drastically better for Anji than a lot of other characters that you can say that it buffs him more than every other character, but it certainly is covering a notable hole he had in his game, and that makes it super valuable. Deflect Shield is a solid mechanic that is not the shiny new flashy toy that Wild Assault is, but it can be ruthlessly effective against certain type of Ogi that Anji struggles to interact with when he can't just do Kacho Forgets to solve the problem, right? Or if you don't even have the meter for Kacho Forgets. This has merit. There are some Oki situations I have just said no to and shut it down by doing Deflect Shield, and it's quite strong. I think the overall effectiveness of this mechanic is still being felt out. I don't think the full applications of where it's going to absolutely shine the most are fully solved yet. It's going to take a while longer to figure out exactly how much value this has compared to Wild Assault. But I still think this is a useful thing for Anji, because if we don't have Kachu Forgets, again, our defense ain't great. We have a 5-frame crouching punch that has excellent reach for a 5-frame normal, but that's not the best Abare in the kit. And our other moves just are not great for interrupts. We have no true reversal outside of Kachu Forgets. We just don't. So this, for some of that really suffocating Oki that we can struggle to get out of, good tool to have. Solid. It can be used against Anji too, but it's not so disruptive to his game plan because his Oki isn't, you know, okay, I put the butterfly on you, I have to open you up. No. Most time when we put the butterfly on someone in Strive, we're just taking an extra long turn, raising the risk gauge, and looking for the opportunity to open them up via a frame trap, a strike throw, using meter to mix, all that sort of stuff. So it can be used against Anji, but I think he's getting more out of shutting down Oki that gives him problems than people are shutting him out using this, at least in my opinion. That one's definitely subject to change. We'll see how Deflect Shield evolves as this goes on. Let's talk about the weaknesses that I think Anji still has, because, as I said, I don't think Anji is elite right now. I just think he is good. And you know what? With where he's been in a lot of this game's history, good is a nice place to be. Let's be real. But for better or worse, one thing that isn't changed for Anji are his buttons. These are all the same. What you see is what you get. It means all his combo routes are intact. The only combo routes he lost are the routes on lightweight characters, because everybody lost those because weight's normalized now. That's not really a huge deal for Anji. That was much more of a big deal when triple co-loop was the way for the max damage. The way his routes are structured now, losing the lightweight route is, I mean, it's a minor inconvenience. I don't think that's a big deal. I don't think Anji's buttons are bad. They're not like they were on launch, where this was one of the worst far S's in the game and was just abhorrent in basically every way. This, I think, is one of, if not his best poke, period. Like, 2S is a very good button. It's not an elite button. It is not a button that's going to make people talk about the character and how they can dominate multiple matchups. You know, this isn't a Ramlethal button. It isn't a Nagoriyuki button. It isn't one of May's 27,000 different disjointed buttons. But it's a solid button. Stand Heavy is a solid button that is a great combo tool because it launches. His sweep is still a very nice combo tool with some good low profile. Stand Kick is very unremarkable, but it does the job you need it to do. His Stand Jab is good. Like, it's good because it'll combo in the KO on anti-air, and his 6P is very good. I do think his 6P is one of the things he has that is better than most 6Ps in this game, just because of the obscene amount of reach this has on it, especially if you have dash momentum behind it. Like, it can snag some hitboxes from kind of ludicrous ranges at times, which, frankly, he needs in those situations. So, but as a whole, I think his buttons are still just okay. Like, nobody's eyes light up talking about Anji's normals and go, oh man, that's the oppressive button. Like, that doesn't exist for him. He also just doesn't have good disjointed buttons. The most disjointed buttons he has are like jumping head or jump dust, which is a very situational button outside of combos, and using it to stall your air momentum. and like, you know, everyone has a tiny bit of disjoint on like far S, right? Or close S, excuse me. But disjoint doesn't really matter because of the proximity on this. It doesn't matter how disjointed it is when you got to be this close to them for it to work in the first place. So what this means is that his overall offense is still heavily reliant on meter. You know, doing stuff like this into fast PRC is still one of his best mixes, period. But that's expensive. That costs a lot of dosh. That's meter. Meter's pretty precious in this game. He still relies heavily on meter for mix-up, and he is very much in the giant group of characters that his offense really does just revolve around the most bare-bones strike-throw game. He has 1+ frame normal, and he has to pray it's enough to put the fear of God in people because of his higher-than-average damage to let him run game and have turns that last more than 2 buttons into a special move, or 2 buttons into Fuujin. That's not a great place to be because, it's not doing anything blatantly unfair or oppressive. I also think that while strike throw gets talked a lot in Strive because it is such a huge aspect of how offense works in this game, dude, strike throw's hard. Unless you have the cheaty kind of strike throw that Nagoriyuki has where it's just a true 50-50, or you have a really massively oppressive button with some serious disjoint and a command grab like Mei or something like that, it's really hard. I have tried so many times to catch people with these kind of strike throw things, only to have them happily unback, I whiff the throw, and then life sucks, right? So, with that still being a major focal point of his actual offense and pressure game, I think as long as Anji's buttons remain just okay, I don't think he'll ever be a truly top-flight character in this game. So many characters that have been elite in Guilty Gear Strive usually have a combination of ludicrous buttons that dominate multiple game scenarios, or a game plan that is just so ruthless and difficult to overcome that you are just at the mercy of it. See Happy Chaos, for example. Anji's still leaning heavily into, I need to outplay my opponent, and I have to make some correct reads. He just happens to have better ways to do that now, thanks to the drastic improvement to Autoguard, but I still consider this a weakness for the character. His offense in pressure is just kind of the vanilla Guilty Gear Strive pressure. This is a thing you can do. You can mix in the Autoguard, but you basically have to condition someone to ever get it started, because people are going to look to either mash or jump out in a lot of situations against Anji, because so many of the options boil down to going into Fuujin, and if they block Fuujin and you have no meter, they can up back almost with impunity. There's just not a lot you can do about that. If you don't have something to Roman cancel, up backing just goes, nah, I'm not dealing with this. I don't have to. Like, you can, yes, you can catch them with Nagiha now and again, but like that's it. That's a soft knockdown. There's no counter hit. So he still has a lot of the same weaknesses. It's just that now we have some way better glue to hold together the actual aspect of forcing the opponent to play differently. And let me tell you, there is a lot of value in forcing your opponent to alter their game plan. When you force players out of their comfort zone, that makes it a lot harder to play high level, to make your decisions always be sound, to always play in a way where you try to minimize risk and mistakes. That makes it harder, and that is a very big benefit. But this does not solve the core weaknesses of the character. As long as this button is this big of a pain in the ass to get consistently to come out because of his weird dashing hitbox, I don't think Anji's ever going to have elite pressure in this game. So, I covered his changes. I covered what I think have become strengths of the character. Cover what I still think are weaknesses, the system mechanics, and how they're benefiting him, which I think is notable. Let's talk about some quick matchup thoughts that I have as I've been playing, against the different characters and stuff I'm seeing and all that good stuff. So let's start with this nerd on the screen, Johnny. I think this could become problematic long term. I think that this is absurdly RPS heavy. You have to deal with Johnny's doing this, and then mixing in far S to try and poke your auto guard recovery, doing this to beat your forward punch, which beats Mistfinder. And if Johnny ever knocks you down and puts the card on you, like, this ain't fun to deal with. This is not fun to deal with, folks. I am not a big fan of how they designed Johnny in this game. I think he's the most dry and uninteresting he's ever been because they just brute forced him having easy guard breaks into a very, very straightforward 50-50 that is ruthlessly good at what it does. But, like, Mistfinder is annoying. It's so annoying to deal with because your only real option to make them just stop spamming Mistfinder is a direct call out with IAD, and that's not great for Anji because, again, he doesn't have the fastest air dash in the world, and you have to do it preemptively. If they think you're gonna IAD at them, they can easily just do upper Mistfinder and swat you out of the sky. So the most common attempt is to forward punch it, and it works. You can absolutely... Wrong button. You can absolutely forward punch this thing, and you can get it on counter hit, and you can do very bad things to Johnny. That can happen. But when you have to play at this range outside of Mistfinder range, and you have to basically blatantly run up and 6P at long distance, you are basically giving Johnny license to backdash once, laugh at you, and then whiff punish. Like, not a hard thing to do. Not at all. The other problem is, like I showed earlier, auto guard's not a great answer to something like Mistfinder. If we auto guard out here, Midare ain't saving us. It's not going to solve the problem. So I do think that this is a matchup where the Kara cancel for Midare into stand S is a must-have. Because if you actually auto-guard something and you're in range, you better make it count. Because you do not want to end up back here again. This is not where you want to live. It's really hard to deal with this character at this range. And the same thing, like, if you do get a combo and you take him to the wall, you better spend one of your resources to get hard knockdown. Because you don't want to go back to round start against Johnny. It's an RPS that is not great. Even the round start RPS of, if he does far S, you can counter hit with sweep if you time it right. But if he does 2S and you do anything other than basically backdash, you lose. And backdashing doesn't feel good because now you're in max Mistfinder range. And, well, that's not where we want to be. Boo. So, I think this matchup could get ugly in the long run. I don't think it's ever going to be fun. I think it's going to feel very, very guess-heavy and very frustrating to try and navigate. So, and you're going to see Johnny everywhere. Just lab your Johnny stuff. You're going to see him all the time because he's very strong. He is not hard to pick up. His brute force game plan is really, really good. I am not a fan of this matchup. Asuka is another one. I still think Asuka is probably going to be the most brutal matchup on paper. I could totally see Asuka ending up the new Happy Chaos of this patch if people keep developing his tech. And Anji's answers to all that screen pollution with the blocks and the spells and everything else, it feels dubious. If we're close, we might be able to Midare, but getting close in the first place is rough. There's going to have to be a lot of labbing and figuring out when you can poke something and go into spin, auto guard and Midare, poke something into Fuujin to try and force your way in. Even if that doesn't end up being a terrible matchup, I think it's going to consistently be very, very frustrating. A character who can just absolutely vomit things all over the screen that prohibit Anji from ever approaching and getting in range, it's not going to be fun. I will not be remotely shocked if the long run Asuka is Anji's worst matchup, but we'll see. Another one, Potemkin. Potemkin's a real character again, and I've always felt he's not a very good matchup for Anji. He is very good at nullifying this and this, because if you do it and he sniffs it at all, you get pod bustered, and that is risk reward that feels real bad. Pod is one of those matchups where this goes back to, even with Midare, this goes back to being not real great. Because the risk reward is really, really bad, because unless you hit with a Kara cancel Midare into big damage, Pot's winning that exchange if he P-busters you out of an auto guard or out of a Kacho Fugetsu. He also boasts really annoying disjointed stuff. His stand jab hitting crouching is a real problem. That's going to make it a lot easier to shut down any of the stuff we want to do when we do get to offense. Fuujin follow-ups are notoriously not good against Potemkin because he has really easy answers to it. I don't think we get blown out of that matchup, but I think that's one that's going to feel bad, and it's going to be even easier to get robbed now because of his buffs. So watch out for that matchup. If you haven't fought Potemkin in a while, it's going to be a lot more difficult, I think, for a good while. I'm still learning a lot about the DLC characters that I haven't fought in my 2-year absence. But in general, I think Anji has to still work very hard against strong zoners and characters that can consistently outrange him, and more importantly, who can outrange Midare. If a character can consistently outrange Midare with the buttons they want to hit to play their base game plan, that is probably innately a difficult matchup for Anji, because if you can make this more or less nullified or drastically tone down its effectiveness, you are putting a big hole in Anji's game. That's just, for better or worse, his game plan is now built around the power that is Midare and the entire Autoguard kit. It is what is going to basically be the glue that holds things together and what you build off of. And in matches where you can't build off it, probably not going to feel great. So, in general, I think this is the strongest Anji's ever been. The Autoguard upgrade for this legacy kit that they originally ham-fisted into Strive is now a legit building block. You can really, really frustrate people with it. You can really, really make people make concessions when they play their game against you. I don't think Anji's going to wow anyone with his buttons or his offensive pressure, or his overall mix-up. Because at the end of the day, like when you look at Anji, it's like, yep, that is a Strive character. That is certainly what you see is what you get. I have seen this before. But the threat of Autoguard now demands our opponents stay much more aware of what they're doing, and it should give us a lot more avenues to approach getting in and starting offense, scoring counter hits, counter poking. I think that's going to help a lot, and he still does above average damage, and that's super important right now. I think that's really good. We'll see how this all evolves, but right now I think this is the first time Anji is a character you can take into a tournament bracket and not feel like you have a second character. You need a second character in the back pocket to deal with certain matchups. I don't think he's going to be running around with a bunch of matchups that he definitively wins. There are definitely not any 7-3s in his favor. I just don't see it. But at this point, there's almost no character I see that just nullifies him by being on the screen anymore. Rest in piss, Zato. Anyway. So yeah, what do you guys think? How are you all feeling about Anji now that we've had a couple weeks under the belt? We're starting to see the way the new system mechanics have evolved, how people are utilizing their resources, the changes to characters who got new moves, the changes to how the matchups and the buffs and the nerfs have affected interactions between characters. What do you think? Do you think Anji is here to stay as a relevant tournament viable character? Or are the holes in his gameplay going to ultimately kind of knock him back down to that? He might ruin a bracket or two in pools, but going the distance is still just going to be too big of a hill to climb. Real curious what you all think. I think he can now. You're going to have to be good. You are probably still going to have to outplay your opponents more than other characters have to blatantly outplay their opponents. But I don't think that is now asking maximum perfectionist play all the time to excel with the character. So that's going to do it for this one. Let me know what you all think. Real curious what you're all feeling after a couple weeks, and yeah, we'll reevaluate again probably down the road and see where things go. I'm still working on my side character. I'm still working on some other stuff. I'm going to work on some guides for Anji. I haven't decided if they're going to be off the cuff or if I'm going to script them, so give me some time on that. But in the interim, thank you again for all the likes, subs, comments. Really appreciate that. If you want to check out the Patreon, that is far and away the best way to support me if you choose to do so. YouTube is changing up how we can control ads with videos, so I have tried to keep my videos mostly unevasive with ads. I try to never put the unskippable ads in my videos just because I don't get that much ad revenue. I'm not that big. But now I'm not going to have a lot of control over that. So Frankly, just use ad block. Don't worry about it. Like, seriously, don't run without ad block when they're gonna brute force that stuff. That's awful. Like, I'll find a way, I promise. But if you do wanna support me making more content and stuff, like I said, Patreon, far and away the best way to do it. So that's gonna do it for this one. I have yammered for way too long. Again, wow, it's like I say that every time I do an analysis video. Who could have seen this coming, Clage? Anyway, thank you so much, everybody. Y'all take care. Be good to each other. I'll catch you on the next one. Peace for now.